Good morning and welcome to Ed's World, where it's always morning, even in the afternoon. I'm Jay Edgar, and over to my left, she loves breakfast and Jesus, two things I am also fond of myself. Thank you for joining us, Karlee Krogman.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today.
Before we get started here, we've got a couple announcements to make. One thing that I want to tease right now that I don't want to give too many details to is I have been working with somebody else who's been on this channel. We'll all remember Jake from Freedom Scoop to revitalize a new product to try and help get some newer voices out there and possibly grow some of our followings as well. So there are going to be details to that coming up. Look for that. If you're listening back to this on Tuesday or watching this on Tuesday, please note that last night I was on the generational gap with John and Robert, both people who have been on this show. We talked a little bit about cars and the OnStar system and something that they were talking about last Friday on their show. We're taking this a step further, so make sure that you go back and look at that. That's going to be linked in the description below. We've got a pretty full show going on this week. We've got the topics, some of which we already talked about on this show last week, but some of them were just happening at the time, so there weren't many details. Last Sunday, right before I went on with Analytical Chick, on Easter, no less, there was an attack in Sri Lanka on a church. There were no details the last time I talked about this, but there have been some details released at this point, so we are going to talk more in detail about that. Those of you who watch my solo videos already know that I've touched on this a little bit, but the Democrats in Congress are mulling over impeachment, looking for some of the things in a similar fashion as to what we saw with the Bill Clinton impeachment back in the late 90s. We'll talk a little bit about that, the media spin, and what would actually happen in an impeachment hearing. As we always do on Ed's World, 2020 is coming up. There's going to be either a continuation of the current presidency or a change in power. And we've got many, many people vying for that. So we're going to be talking about that, including the fact that Joe Biden finally ended his will he, won't he saga and decided he was going to throw his hat into the ring. CNN had a major town hall speaking of the presidency, getting a lot of the presidential candidates up onto the stage and talking about some ideas. There were some flubs and some gaffes, and some of the things that we had out there really made some people look in the wrong light. But we'll talk about all of that and some of the highlights from that. And because I have a college student sitting over here, this is perfect that this happened this week. Elizabeth Warren suggesting releasing student debts and college cost. She wasn't talking about the government paying them off. She was just talking about eliminating that money altogether, which violates a few clauses of the Constitution. And we'll talk about what that would do for college students and recent college graduates, as well as what it would do for the economy. It is going to be all of this and more on Ed's World. Thank you for watching this on YouTube. If you like what you see, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. We always comment back. And hit that like button. That helps us move up the suggested charts. If you're listening back to this on audio, please subscribe as well. And if you are on iTunes, please leave us a 5-star rating and a good review. That, again, helps us move up the charts and get into the search results more. After that lengthy introduction, it is time to talk about the most important part of this episode. Karlee, please
Hi.
tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So I am a freshman at South Dakota State University. I go to school in Brookings here, and I grew up here. And so my whole family lives here, and I started a blog called Dakota Charlie. And I kind of got that name from South Dakota. And then my little brother, actually, my nickname for him was Charlie. And so I thought it was just cute and catchy, and I loved writing. And so I started in high school a lot and got into AP literature and composition, and it kind of just exploded from there.
Thank you for that. Tell us a little bit about the subjects that you write about and how it was that you decided that you were going to get into alternative media blogging a little bit more specifically. I,
Okay, so Yeah, I have a really big faith. That's a really big part of who I am. And my parents got divorced when I was probably a fifth grader. And so that is kind of where I found my strength, especially through that time. And it's just exploded from there and expanded. And so I also, my family has a really big liking, I would say, for politics. And so my grandpa and my uncle both work at the state capitol here in South Dakota, and my dad works as the Brookings County Commissioner at the local level. And so I've always had an interest, and so I went with it and took my writing skills and my faith and my personal beliefs and ran with it, because I think a lot of younger kids, especially in college and high school and in that transitioning time of life, are confused and necessarily don't know what to believe. And so I just took my perspectives and wrote about them.
No, I understand that entirely. Actually, the basis for this show, we talked about this a little bit off mic, was I did the same thing. I was actually talking about dating and lifestyle, and
Hmm.
I started getting into politics. But yeah, it was a way for me to communicate with young people that didn't feel like they had a voice at the time. So
Yeah.
it's completely understandable.
Hmm. It was just about like clearing up any confusion that those kids would have about these things, because the media is always like bombarding us with one side or the other. And so I just wanted to share with my writing skills and just from a real perspective with no intentions behind what I was writing. You know what I mean?
I do entirely. Well, we've got a pretty dense packed show and some dark topics and maybe some funny topics here. So I think it's time for us to get into this.
Let's do it. I'm excited.
All right. So, as we talked about when we first started talking about this, I talked a little bit last week when I had Analytical Chick on. The Sri Lanka attack had just happened. Some militants went in with suicide vests and attacked a church during worship on Easter Sunday. It was Saturday still for us, but on Easter Sunday while they were having their morning worship. The media has been reacting to this entirely, including some very choice words coming from some key Democrats. So, what do you know about this so far?
So I know that the Sri Lanka bombers, they were from a Islamist group, and I know that they went to multiple churches and multiple high-end hotels, and through this 250 people were killed, 500 injured. I think those are rough estimates probably, but with that, I know that it was the most violent attack this country has had since their 2019, or not 2009 end to their civil war. And just awful. Like, I don't know how to, for me, Easter, obviously, with my faith background, is a huge day. It's a day of celebration, it's a day of complete worship. And it almost is, for me, just like an equivalent. So to be put in that kind of situation and suffer from that kind of trauma and tragedy, I honestly can't imagine.
It's interesting to me because we're looking back at this now. This happened a week ago Sunday for us. I mean, there's 8 days ago for where you and I are sitting right now because it's still Monday as we're
Mhm.
recording here. But yeah, this happened 8 days ago, and this has almost completely fallen out of the news entirely at this point.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because you know that if this went the other way around, I hate to point fingers at somebody and blame people, but you know if this was the other direction around, this would still be in the news. We're still hearing about the mosque attack in New Zealand, and that's
Hmm.
been a month at this point. So that worries me that it just falls out of the news like that before many of the other podcasters out there would even have a chance to talk about it.
Oh yeah, because this attack, I don't think it was um shared about how tremendous it truly was. I almost feel like even the fire at Notre Dame was more shown by the media than this attack was, and no one died in that I know of. But um it's still like a huge tragedy, and like I said, it was one of the deadliest acts of terror the country has suffered since 2009, and that's really significant.
I know even before the any of the major details were out there, we talked with analytical chick AC last week. Uh, she was already saying attack of peace, citing the truck of peace ideas of many of the other European incidences that have happened with Islamic terror. One of the things that stood out the most about this, and one of the things that people on media corners are still talking about when they talk about the Sri Lanka attack, is going to be some of the reaction out there. Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, when they were commenting on this, which I don't understand why either one of them is still commenting on things out there, that is an entirely different topic that we could talk about for hours on end. But neither one of them said Christians. And, from the outset, people could just say that was a gaffe, or people were trying to talk about the idea that this was a specific celebration going on. But they both said Easter worshippers. What was your take on that when you heard about that?
So when I read their tweets, I didn't necessarily take it offensive because of the amount of people that were injured and killed in the attacks. I could definitely see how they didn't want to put that, oh, they were all Christians label over it and kind of umbrella all those people, because really, truly, there were probably people injured in these attacks that weren't Christians and were tourists or travelers in these countries, especially when it comes to the hotel thing. And so I would just say, with their choice of words, they didn't want to put that Christian label necessarily over the people that were injured and hurt in this tragedy, but wanted to keep it neutral in that perspective.
See, yeah, I almost look at that too. And when I first saw that, a lot of people from the outset wouldn't think much of it. Like you said, it wouldn't be much of a thing. But so many people on social media have seen that and taken that as an idea of malice. And I don't necessarily want to attribute malice to something like this at the point, but I
Hmm.
have seen some of the other ideals that have come out of that side of the aisle that made me think, yeah, maybe.
Hmm. And that's the thing, is it's a maybe. It's so hard to I'm a sports management and communications major. And so when I take classes on communication through media and the impact of nonverbal language and how significant that really is to effective communication, social media blurs all those lines. And so you can take it any way that you want. You can be offended by it. You can see, oh, Easter worshipers, Christians, synonyms. But it really is up to discretion
Hmm.
of the person reading the tweet,
And
which
that's
makes it harder.
That is, and we're moving on too from, I think it's good a little bit in our world that we have the opportunity now to actually get our ideas direct, or not our ideas, but our communications directly from some of our politicians. I know that some of them are still working through a staff of people that are managing their social media and putting their public statements out, but for the most part, and that's part of the reason that I think Trump had some of his success was the fact that he used his Twitter handle to go out and communicate directly to the people rather
Oh, and
than
boy, does he.
he does. But I mean, rather than going out and getting his press conference going through his press secretary, going through so many things, he's going out and talking directly to the people.
Hmm.
One of the drawbacks I think I see to that is the fact that, yes, they're communicating directly, but they're doing so through text. Whereas if they stood in front of a microphone with 7,000 cameras flashing flash bulbs at them as they're sitting up there, and every camera in the nation pointed at them at the time, we could read the subtext from their voices. And for an extent, we can't really do that with a tweet anymore. So it makes it hard to attribute malice or genuine concern.
Exactly. Yeah. And so really it's up to the attitude of the viewers to decide, oh, is this offensive? Oh, no, they were just trying to be neutral, like my perspective, or whatever your take may be.
It's an interesting idea. I mean, most everybody who's been on this show before might actually jump onto the other camp. So yeah, I'm glad that we could see a neutral. Um, perspective to this. As I said when we started talking about this topic, there have been a lot of parallels drawn with this and the reaction and kind of what the news reaction was to the Christchurch shooting that happened over in New Zealand a few weeks ago. What do you see different and the same between those two events?
Well, I would say the Christchurch was a shooting.
Yeah.
And so that's one big difference. It was not a suicide bomb. And also, it wasn't Easter. Easter is a significant holiday for Christians across the world. And to take the initiative to ruin that holiday for those families and those travelers, the people at the hotels, even the people that aren't in the worship service, when you encompass the range that these terrorists took and the initiative and the thought and the planning, like, oh, we are going to do this on Easter, the day that frees Christians from the sin that we were given. I don't, I think it's another level.
The timing of this is interesting. I actually was just thinking about this when you were talking about this as well, because of the fact that they chose to do it in Sri Lanka with where Sri Lanka is, as far as the international date line
Hmm.
and the date that it was. Um, from what I've understood from a lot of the terrorist attacks out there, from a lot of the manifestos that have surrounded terrorist attacks, suicide bombers, one of the things that they are trying the most to do is put terror into Christians and non Muslims in the Western countries like the US, Canada, or
Hmm.
Britain, or other European countries that are Christian that work against their ideals. The timing of this and the fact that they did it in Sri Lanka meant that all of us were waking up on Easter morning in these countries like that to see this before we got a chance to go out and do our regular worship. Some of us were even going to bed and hearing this.
Yes.
So that I wonder if that was deliberate or not as to why they chose to do that in Sri Lanka or at that time in Sri Lanka rather.
It very well could have been. I would not put that past them because that was that was the surprise factor for me is Sri Lanka, their Christian population is not very significant, especially when you do compare it to Western countries.
Mm-hmm.
Their general like religion is Buddhism. And
Mm-hmm.
so doing this at a Christian church on Easter Sunday, not in a Western country, but at the time that Westerners would be starting their holiday, waking up and celebrating this day and hearing this news at that time would be a day ruiner,
Yeah.
honestly.
Maybe even in bigger cities like New York or something, even prevent people from going to church or mass, I would think.
Yeah, and also
I'd think
that's a
twice
good
about it.
point to bring up is the idea that they did this during a church service. Should I go to church? Am I safe in my church? What if they are planning something on US soil in a significant city?
Well, I don't think that you and I would have anything to worry about given our geographic locations. But yeah,
Yeah.
like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, which is not that far from me.
Mhm.
Any place significant and large like that, I would have second thoughts.
Yeah, instilling that sense of fear in the other thing that I thought it was interesting about it was it wasn't necessarily a country that they were. I mean, obviously, Sri Lanka will probably have some repercussions to this action, but they, I think it honestly impacted the religion more than anything.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Because again, you keep bringing up the fact it was targeted on the holiest day of
Mhm.
the religion that the basis of Christianity is the fact that Christ rose on Easter Sunday.
Exactly.
Otherwise it would be almost indistinguishable from Judaism at that point.
Hmm.
So yes, on the holiest day and on the day that centers around what we celebrate and why we are Christians, at the time where everyone's it's I can absolutely attribute malice and a lot of careful planning to that. So
Oh yeah.
it looks like it was Al Qaeda was the one that claimed credit for this. I thought
I
ISIS at
saw that
first.
too.
Yeah,
Because I saw when I was researching it, I saw there was an article about an Islamist group called, it was NFJ, NTJ.
I did not see that.
So what it was it was a little known local militant Islamist group known as the National Tawhid Jamaat. And then I saw another article that said that ISIS claimed to be responsible for this.
Yeah, it puts them back in the spotlight too, because one of the things that we've all been talking about in the news as we've gone on recently is the fact that ISIS has been close to decimated, and now they're back in the news with another major claim under their belt. Whether or not they
Hmm.
were responsible for it or not, or still have the funding or ability to do so, they can still make themselves significant by the fact that they can claim it, and most people will take them seriously for that.
Oh, 100%. Their
Yeah.
record remains true.
What do you think is going to come out of this in the coming weeks? I know, like I said, this kind of fell out of the news already, but what do you think is going to come out of this for the West and for Sri Lanka as we go forward with this information in our hands?
Oh man, well, I know that Sri Lanka has definitely upgraded their security when it
Hmm.
comes to this kind of thing. I saw that they outlawed face coverings.
I did see that too. That is, I do and I don't agree with that because,
Yeah,
in many,
that's different.
yeah. I mean, there are other places out there like, if you go to the Metrodome or in Minute, well, it's not the Metrodome anymore. They got rid of that. But
Target Field.
yeah, Target Field over in
Uh-huh.
Minnesota, they do have certain clothing restrictions, but I know they relax that for religious reasons over there, partially
Hmm.
because they're in a very Islamic area of the Twin Cities. But
Oh yeah. And even like, so this is gonna be like, I don't know if this is kind of for younger kids, but when I was in high school, part of our dress code was you were not allowed to wear winter coats for safety reasons. Basically, because of school shootings, they didn't want you to possibly have a gun under your winter coat because you could easily disguise that. And South Dakota, we have a very prevalent hunting and conservative atmosphere in that aspect. And so guns are very, very common around here. Hunting is a huge part of our economy, and it's also very cold here. So, our issue with this was our high school was cold, and kids were cold, and so they were consequently wearing their winter coats. And then teachers would have to ask them, please, will you take off your winter coat because of this potential threat? And so, just with that, it shows that it differs when it comes to clothing and protection. You never really know. And it's also very circumstantial about where you're at and your environment.
well, yeah, and I understand all of that entirely, and I'll be showing the difference in generations here between the two of us because I'm just about twice your age. But when I was in high school, Columbine had just happened.
Hmm.
There was an incident with my best friend. It's one of the first solo videos that I put out when I first started my channel, where he had gotten angry and started screaming, and a lot of people tried to attest that to the fact that he was going to come back and shoot up the school, even though he never made a direct threat or had any intention to do so.
Hmm.
Again, that was in 2000. The first major school shooting that the media paid attention to had legitimately just happened.
Hmm.
But we had never been allowed to wear winter coats in school, and northern Wisconsin probably just the same climate as South Dakota,
Yeah.
and the same idea I said in the video that I made. I came from a small high school of about 500 students at the time. There were usually on any given day 200 cars in the parking lot. On any given day, anywhere through the school year, there were at least 100 guns in the parking lot.
Oh, yeah. I can totally relate. Yeah.
They were cased and unloaded as per Wisconsin state law for transport of weapons, but yeah,
Uh-huh.
at any given day, because of so many farmers, somebody might have to take a 20 gauge after a coyote when he went home or something like that. There were, yeah, easily 100 guns out there. Unless it
Hmm.
was April or November, because then it was 300.
Yeah, exactly. And I just remember my older brother is very into hunting and his friends were all in that, and so they would have their guns in their cars. And I remember one of his friends got suspended for having the vehicle in his car and on school grounds because that, as you would know, would probably be illegal and is. But it was all through innocence. There was no malice behind any of that. But regardless, they still have to be proactive about it because of how time has gone on with this.
Actually, at the time, it was not illegal to have a cased and unloaded vehicle, firearm in your vehicle in Wisconsin on school
Real, oh
grounds.
my gosh, yeah.
I would have to look and see if that's changed or not. It wouldn't surprise me if it has, but yeah, at the time, it was not illegal.
Uh-huh. Actually, it's so crazy how that has evolved because even South Dakota had in our legislature this year, and it was a bill on allowing campus carry. And there was so much news coverage about that, and so many college kids were took the initiative to send emails to their senators and go lobby against this bill, which kind of surprised me, but at the same time also kind of made me happy because I was like, wow, like maybe they are taking the initiative and their citizenship rights to give themselves a voice now and make these changes.
How many people are in South Dakota? Just out of
There's
curiosity.
about there's about 800,000 people in South Dakota. Not even a million.
It would actually, that's so different too, because between the region I grew up in and kind of where I live now in Wisconsin, I mean, Wisconsin would probably be the exact same way if it wasn't for Madison and Milwaukee.
Oh yeah, I believe it.
You've you've been here, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I have.
So yeah, that's what I have to say on the Sri Lanka attack. Going back to what we started this conversation about. Do you have any further thoughts on this before we move into the next topic here?
No, honestly, I would say we covered a lot, covered more ground than we probably were expecting to, but just thoughts and prayers go out to these people. I could not imagine going through that kind of thing on Easter Sunday.
Well, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next topic here. And some of what we're going to talk about here actually happened before you were born. So I might have to
I
do a little
know.
bit of teaching onto this.
This
But
is a good history lesson.
those who watch my solo videos will undeniably know the fact that I mostly think that Limbaugh is a bit too extreme for my tastes. He's a little bit of a shepherd in some of the things that he says. He does get some good information out there, but his delivery is so so in my eyes. But he had a monologue at the beginning of his show this past Tuesday that actually hit the nail right on the head. As we all know, the Mueller investigation has finished. The Department of Justice and Robert Mueller III himself have both said that there is no further indictment that is to come from his investigation. And that has not stopped the people who are unfaithful to the president and the people who want to see him go to try and turn this over into an obstruction of justice case and try to move for impeachment for him. Nancy Pelosi has said that the House Democrats will not pursue impeachment, but those on the ground have said otherwise and are now trying to push the House into introducing the articles of impeachment. A couple of them have actually done so already. There have been some parallels drawn to the Bill Clinton impeachment, which happened in my teenage years, and even a little bit that happened over to Watergate, which was before I was born. So, what do you know so far about the current situation? We'll talk about the other two in just a second.
Okay, so what I found basically was from the Mueller investigation, there are allegations that Trump was involved or sharing emails with Russia throughout his campaign, and it was behind closed doors. And so, with that, Mueller's report said that there was no evidence of coordination between the Trump campaign and allegations, the amount of proof that was needed for these allegations to go through did not come up, obviously, because the report has been dropped. And with this, they were able to uh, push fake news about Hillary Clinton,
Hmm.
which is also very interesting in relations and regards to that. But very, very decisive, very two-sided. It says it was warped and biased, which I love. I'm a very much a learner. And so researching all of these kind of things is something I really enjoy doing, and getting both sides of the story obviously is very important. But yeah, that's what I know about it. And with that, there at the end of the day, there's not much we can do about it. Did he do it? Possibly. Do we know if he did it? I don't know if we ever will. But the allegations are there.
It's interesting that you bring up the proof of that because that's one of the things that we keep going over and over again when we look at what's going to happen if the articles get introduced, what a trial would be, and what actually goes on in a criminal proceeding and an impeachment itself. Because we have seen from so many cases that have come out over the last few years that regardless of evidence, if somebody is not sent out to court, they do tend to still be tried in the court of social media and public opinion.
Hmm.
And I think that a lot of Twitter has already condemned our president to death based on the court of public opinion
Hmm.
at this point. Whereas he does, under the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, rather, he does have the right to have the trial, and under the Constitution and the suggestions that were made in the Federalist Papers, yes, he has the right to go before and be tried by the Senate for impeachment. He can't really be indicted or tried while he's in office, but he has the right to his day in court, and I think everybody does when they've been accused of a crime.
Hmm. Oh yeah, exactly. And so when you take that into perspective though, for I would say, like you said, I want the physical proof. I cannot take the opinions of others because there are so many people who dislike Trump and are very vocal about it. And so taking that amount of people and using that as evidence, I don't think is reasonable.
Well, it's interesting too when we talk about, because I brought up Limbaugh and his monologue at the beginning, and now it's time for your history lesson.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
When I was 14, the House of Representatives, controlled by conservatives at the time, pushed forward the articles of impeachment against President Bill Clinton.
Hmm.
The allegation and the charge that they brought up when they indicted him was for perjury because when he was making testimony to sexual harassment and the allegations that he was using the office in the way that it did, he lied under oath and he pushed others to do so at the time. Now, to listen to the news at the time, and this was before the internet was mainstream. There was no social media at the time, so we were getting our news from CNN and our local stations, especially in rural Wisconsin. Not all of us had the cable news network still in our cable packages yet. So it was either what was going on the radio or what was going on some of the the biggest cable news network and our local news stations. To listen to the news at the time, you would have thought that the impeachment was going through simply because of the sexual acts that President Clinton did in office. There was no mention of the perjury charge at all. You'd never even heard about it. I didn't know that it was a perjury charge until a couple of years ago, and I lived through it.
Oh my goodness. This is so interesting.
Limbaugh said when he was going through his monologue that the way that the media spun it, and again, after living through it, I can attest that that's exactly what happened. The media spin on the story was the fact that the conservatives at the time were so angry about the fact that Clinton was having sex in the Oval Office and they weren't getting any at all, that that's why they were pushing impeachment. And I legitimately believe that was absolutely true.
Oh my goodness. That's funny. But so yeah, I obviously have learned about Bill Clinton's affair with Monica Lewinsky and that whole ordeal. But with that, I did not have any prior knowledge of the perjury charge that Congress was trying to push at this time. So that all is also very interesting from my perspective because that poses the question, why wouldn't they teach that when this is such a significant issue, especially with Donald Trump as our president now? Why wouldn't I learn about the perjury charge in addition to his affair? You know what I mean?
I do, and again, we'll go back into a little bit of a history lesson of the platforms of the time. You were just a baby at the time, obviously.
Yes.
At the time, and even I was raised in a union house, so between my upbringing and some of the things that my parents taught to me before I actually started looking into things for myself, I was always taught to believe that the Democrats were always right. But
Okay.
also, the ideas that were going around out there is that the Conservative Party, especially under George W. Bush, because of the things that they saw under George H.W. Bush before that, when I was still about 5 years old, that the conservative crowd was ultra Christian and didn't want to do anything else. They wanted to ban abortion because they didn't want anybody having sex at the time outside of marriage at all.
Hmm.
They wanted us all sitting on our hands. I mean, you look at the Conservative Party now, and all you see is mainly libertarianism and small governmentism to the varying extents that it is. But yes,
Hmm.
the portrayal of it before, and even before social media and people could get their opinions out, was the fact that, yes, this was this ultra religious Christian sect that was bordering on occultism.
Oh my goodness. That's interesting. That's so interesting because I was raised in a conservative family. My family is Republican,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mine isn't.
understandable. But as I've been like you said, as I've looked into things more closely, I have definitely gone more on a fact-based side than a feelings side, or I'm Republican, so I need to believe this, that kind of scenario. And so with that, I would not correlate faith at this point in time to the conservative party. Yes, the majority of us are Christians, I would say, and have very strong feelings when it comes to that. But there are conservatives who do not have that solid faith base and are have those beliefs because of their environment and their upbringing, which might not have anything to do with their religion.
Exactly. Let's take a second and look at what could happen if the articles did get pushed through,
Okay.
because the media spin is going to be completely different. That was the whole point of the Limbaugh opener, and it's really completely true. Because right now, that's not going to be. They're not going to try and push this on collusion or any other point of Trump's personality that might get thrown out if they try and push any of this. This is going to be straight out obstruction. This is going to be straight out perjury. They're going to try and actually throw the concrete evidences onto him through the media. From what
Hmm.
I understand, this was a little bit of the same strategy that they used against Nixon back in the late 70s.
Yes.
But I was not around then, so I can't attribute to that personally like I can
Me
under
either.
Clinton.
But the one thing that I would say that's significant about it now is going back to the communication aspect of things. The media has such a more significant role in today's society than it did during Nixon's time or even Clinton's time. And so when you throw in the use of Facebook and Twitter. I would say primarily.
Hmm.
Instagram is more pictures based, but Twitter is used on a daily basis. And even I would say Trump's reactions to those kind of allegations and that proof would be blown up just because of his presence on social media already.
Well, yeah, and the mainstreams out there have an army of people on Twitter who don't even need to get paid to do that. Will just extend their ideas out to other people
Oh yeah.
based on headlines. So I just had a conversation this morning about the difference between a headline that was meant to talk or incite rage and the actual facts of the case.
Hmm.
Just a little
Yeah.
sidebar on that, just a little bit to kind of make my point there. One of my friends posted on Facebook this morning that a person got no jail time after he raped a 14-year-old over in New York, and he's only going to be on probation and this and that, and they just want him to have the felony. He raped a 14-year-old. He's not getting any jail time. Okay, there's more to this story than I thought.
Uh-huh.
So I looked into it.
Yeah.
It was third degree rape. The guy was a bus driver, a school bus driver. It was what they call third degree rape, which is an instance where it is consensual physically, but due to age or mental capacity, consent cannot actually be given.
Wow.
So that was a full case of statutory rape, and the prosecutor didn't want to bring it over to trial where the girl could possibly testify and say, "Oh, I love him and he would never do this," and then the
Hmm.
guy walks free completely with no conviction of any sort or anything else. Now he actually has to register as a sex offender, and he's going to get some punishment out of it.
Yeah. And so with that, it just proves it's so like that and reinforces the importance of technological education and having people understand like do not go off the initial feelings that you get from those headlines, but do the research, look into things. And I'm such a big supporter on that because I've been confused before by that kind of thing. And so doing what you did, I would say is huge.
Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. And Twitter is such a, you only get so many characters.
Hmm.
And so it's such a confusing social media network because it's so easy to say one sentence that technically says the truth, but might be bending it a little bit or might shine a different little bit of a light. And so when you get back to that communication factor, nonverbal communication plays a huge role in communication as a whole.
One thing I want to look at as we close out of this topic here is would be the end result if they push the articles and what actually might be trying to get pushed, because the Senate right now is relatively faithful to the president. They haven't been from the beginning of his presidency, no doubt. Both houses did authorize the Mueller report, but right now, if the trial was held, if the articles of impeachment were introduced and the trial was held in the Senate, the president would likely get acquitted. And I'm pretty sure that every Democrat in the House knows this. When you couple this with the media spin and them making sure that everybody knows that this was obstruction, whether he's convicted or acquitted at the time, I don't think that any of this is meant to actually get the indictment and get the removal. I think this is an idea going into the 2020 election to try and bring those poll numbers down because they are very high right now, especially
Mhm.
for a first term president. You don't see this out of a first term president, numbers like this.
Yeah. And that's honestly, I could definitely see that side of things where they just want to bring attention to the issues that they're having right now with him in power, especially with the 2020 elections coming up. And the other interesting thing that I love about this election is the amount of Democrats that are running and the amount of Republicans that are running and how that really is going to play out.
I think you just did our transition for us
Perfect.
because the next thing we are actually going to be talking about is the 2020 race, 2020 watch, and what's happened since the last time I talked on this show about it, including, as you said, the clown car that is the Democrat primaries right now.
Yeah.
The first debates are actually starting to going to be coming up pretty soon here. I don't remember what the exact date was, but yeah, that's going to be coming up and ending the will he won't he saga that's been going on since January. Joe Biden entered the race this past week officially.
Joe Biden.
After all
Maybe
of
for
the
the last time.
maybe, I mean,
Well, I guess we'll see.
the average age of a man in this country is 75, so he's on borrowed time as it is. What do you
Well, from
think?
that perspective, Bernie Sanders is too. Actually, Bernie Sanders is 77. He's still kicking.
I don't know if I'd call that kicking, but he's still breathing. Let's put it that way.
Still breathing. Yeah. Same thing.
So let's talk Biden first. What do you think about Biden? Because my opinion has changed from the first time I started paying attention to Biden to now. But I mean, you are
Mhm.
just becoming an adult now, so you may not have
Yes.
had that same reach back from 2008. So how do you see Biden right now?
So, right now, I would see him as a very, very significant leader in the Democratic Party because he is, I would say, the most likely to win the Democratic primary. And I would say he has the best chance of competing against President Trump because of his history in the office as the vice president with President Obama
Mm-hmm.
and the popularity that Obama still has in the media and the impact that he left on not only African Americans but the Democratic Party as a whole. I would definitely say that that gives him some credibility.
Absolutely. The thing with Biden, when I first started paying attention to him, was in 2007 when it became apparent that Barack was going to become the nominee.
Hmm.
Now, that was where I started to shift sides because I grew up in a Democrat household and I grew up voting Democrat.
Yes.
My second fiance was very, very heavily into the Democrat Party and kind of pushed that on me as well. So, from being away from my family at the time, being away from her, because I was living in Massachusetts at the time, I had started to form some of my own opinions on things, and I wasn't really ready at the time to jump over to the McCain side of the ship and the conservative side of the ship.
Hmm.
As you can see, you've probably looked back through my channel before. I have since come to peace with that. But I wasn't ready to make that transition just yet at the time. But I considered Obama's agenda to be too extreme and too far to the left, pushing too
Yes.
far on a collectivist socialist platform. I
Hmm.
actually had planned to write in Joe Biden at the top of the ticket at the time because he represented more of the union friendly, business friendly, neoliberal type that I was used to at the time coming out of the Clinton presidency, having my opinions as I did with W at the time, and again, just not being ready to become a conservative yet.
Yeah.
But I don't see
Hmm.
him the same way anymore.
How would you say that you see him now?
Obviously, with his comments about the fact that he wouldn't sit down and try and talk to the president, he would just want to take him back behind the gym and beat the hell out of him. I didn't much care for that.
Yeah.
First off, I see him as having a massive target on his back
Hmm.
because of the direction that the Democrat Party has gone, even since I decided to change teams over there because they didn't get better, they got worse.
Yes.
I don't see Biden as being effective. I think he's got too much baggage. I've looked now back at some of his voting record, and he's not an effective uniter. He's going to play partisan. He's going to try to shut down the other side. And for all of his faults, the president has been shown that he's been willing to reach across the aisle. He's had Schumer and Pelosi in his office trying to discuss things, trying to figure things out, trying to build that common ground that they won't let him have.
Hmm.
For all the other faults that the man has, he has at least tried to do that.
Yes.
And I don't
I
see
agree.
Biden doing that.
Uh-huh. And that's the one thing I feel that the anger that Joe Biden has about Donald Trump's presidency as a whole will cause him to act in a different way than he possibly would have back in 2008.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's a definite thing. The president has brought out the worst in the left.
Oh, yeah, and that's the huge thing. And you can even tell that by the amount of candidates that are running for president. Like, there are candidates that probably know that they're not even going to win, but they want to be in these debates and they want to have their opinions heard. And not only their opinions, but their plans of action and how they want to make these changes and how they're so important. And at this point, it's almost the Democratic Party against Trump.
Well, that's the thing too. I've always said, looking at the candidacy and the primaries right now, there doesn't seem to be an effective platform. Some of them actually are trying to start and make a platform, but they're not
Mhm.
being very coherent with it. But for the most part, the platform of the Democrat Party right now is I hate Trump more than this guy next to me.
Exactly. And that with Joe Biden, that's the one concern I have. That's the one main concern I have with that is that seems like a trait that he is not afraid to show.
Less thought on Biden here before we actually get out into the rest of the field. Biden is going to have a tough time going through the primaries. I did my announcement video for Biden yesterday. I put that out. And I talked about the fact that Biden does have a platform, as
Hmm.
I talked about when I talked about writing him in. Joe Biden has a platform that would work very well on a general election basis. He can appeal to some of the more union minded and some of the more worker and business minded people that jumped ship over to Trump because so much of the Democrat Party had turned so hard into the socialist lane. He can make that
Hmm.
appeal to them. And in fact, he probably would have done the same if he would have gotten through the primaries back in 2016, which he was trying to do at the time. With the primary field as it is right now, though, I don't know if Joe Biden has a chance to make it to the end because he's trying to run center against everybody else who is trying to run left, and a field of voters who is trying to move the party even further left than the candidates are trying to run right now.
That's going to be tough. I would say the Democratic primary is going to be historic just because of how divisive some of the candidates are and how divisive the party is now and how far left it has moved. Because also, I know, well, I don't necessarily know for fact, but there are Democrats who do not are not extreme leftists. They are more centered and they are more partisan, but which side are they going to vote for
Mm-hmm.
is the question.
Or are they going to get pressured out of their offices when they try to go home and run against somebody who's going to try and run to the left of them?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, Cortez is going out there, and she's vehemently denied this now, but she's been on record saying, well, if you don't try and vote our way, I have a list of people that are getting ready to primary you.
Oh man, she is something.
She is. So let's talk about the rest of the field now that we've talked about the announcement of Joe Biden.
Yeah.
I have a series of questions that I always ask my guests when we're going through this segment. First question: who do you think makes it to the end?
Oh my goodness. Toughest question right from the get-go.
Absolutely.
I think President Trump is the most likely to win the Republican primary, obviously.
Well, Bill
And
Weld is the only person that's running against him, and he's a
exactly.
joke.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, with that, oh man, that's a tough one. I would definitely say that Biden has the most likely chances of making it to the end of the primary, but it's not going to be easy. He's definitely going to work for it or need to work for it because a lot of these candidates are realizing that he's the candidate that they have to beat at this point in time. And so that is going to be the biggest challenge for him.
I can't wait to see the dirt that comes out about him.
I know it's going to be so interesting. And the other thing that I'm really interested in is the amount of females that are running on the Democratic side of things. And I cannot wait to just get to know them more and learn about their like I'm a big communications person, obviously, but just see how they hold themselves. And is it going to be more of a Hillary Clinton attitude, or will it be kind of more of a Sarah Palin thing, or will it be more of a Cortez thing? And so I'm really interested.
I'm interested for and this is a complete side note. You remember the movie Mean Girls, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I am interested to see what happens when you have several women running against each other for the primary, just based on what we saw out of that movie.
That'll be, oh, that's a good point. And especially when it comes to age differences,
Mm-hmm.
uh, like Elizabeth Warren is 69. And when you go back to some of the younger candidates,
Tulsi Gabbard is my
like
age.
she's 38.
Well, she is. No,
That's
she's older than I am,
huge.
but not much.
But that is going to be a huge difference in how they communicate with each other and the opinions that they hold just because of the environment and the time periods that they've grown up in. And so it'll be really interesting.
I'm sure you know, being a young woman yourself, women in competition with each other are vicious to each other,
Oh, yes, I would agree with that statement, especially when it comes to the presidential election.
or power in general, for that matter.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's see. Which question do I want to ask you next? Next question: who do you want to see make it to the end? And we're talking just on the left side right now. Who do you want to see make it to the end?
I honestly think it would be really cool for a female to have a significant role in the Democratic side of things, just in the fact that it proves that the female presence in the US and the equality perspective has advanced. I think that would be really awesome. I also, this, I think, I do not think he is going to win, but Bernie Sanders is such an interesting guy. And just from the way that he held himself in the last election, I want to see how he takes this one too. I think that'll be really interesting.
I think it would be interesting to sit and watch two old New Yorkers sit back and shout at each other on the debate stage.
Yeah, right?
The
Like the
the
debates
accents.
this year are going to be awesome. And I'm not even Democrat.
So to take that just a step further on that, then I asked you seriously who you want to see to get to the end. Entertainment value. Who do you want to see get to the end?
Oh my gosh. Entertainment wise.
Who do you think is going to be the funniest one to watch?
Oof. I I honestly don't know because I haven't seen the Democratic side of things a lot. I haven't seen how they interact with each other in debates, but I would say it'll be very interesting age-wise because the age gaps are so significant that I think a lot of disagreements might stem from that.
On that note, I do want to share my answers on to the last two. First off, or the last questions as well. First, I don't think Biden makes it to the end.
You don't.
I don't.
Okay.
I think you'd be the best one to be at the end, but I don't think some of the more ideological people who would be voting for him across the country see it the same way. He's very centrist, and they want somebody to the left of Stalin to be in place. I work. I live close to Madison, Wisconsin, and yeah, I see the progressive agenda in full
Hmm.
force every single day. So I don't
Okay.
think that they want to see somebody that centrist there. I think that would be the best chance to get to the presidency to beat the current president, but I don't think that the progressives are willing to accept that.
Who do you think will ultimately take the cake in this race.
As much as I know that the union and the business Democrats don't want to see her, I think the DNC has their intention on putting Warren to the end. Just from things I've heard from political podcasts from the left, and things that I've heard left leaning higher ups say, not necessarily the people on the ground, but the higher ups start to say. I think they've coordinated Warren already. They're just doing the primaries as a
That
formality.
would be so interesting at the end of the primaries to see Elizabeth Warren compete against Donald Trump. That would be a race and a half.
As far as who I would want to see it's an interesting point you bring up that you wouldn't mind seeing a woman. I wouldn't mind seeing a woman be the president either. I mean, it's for me, it's whoever's most qualified, gender, race, none of that even matters to me at all. I look
hmm
at the agenda and I want to see the agenda get there, not necessarily the demographics.
I'm at the same point.
I know everyone wanted to say, well, Hillary needs to be president because it's time to have a woman president. Okay, let's have a woman president. Just not that one.
That was, oh my gosh, you're speaking to, or you're preaching to the choir with that one. I would definitely say that yes, a female president is exactly the direction that I want our country to go. And actually, South Dakota just elected our first female governor, and she is incredibly conservative, which works well for South Dakota. But it's the direction that society wants to take, and it's the point that has been proven time and time again, and that females are able to do this job at this level effectively. And so with that, I would definitely say that taking that step for females as a whole would be so awesome. But Hillary, with her previous endeavors in the political party and her role as the first lady, I do not think was the one for it, the job at that time.
As far as who I want to see get to the end, Swalwell is the one I want to see get to the end because I want to see him have to put up or shut up because of the things that he said about nuking Middle America.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he's got to be held to account for his actions, and I don't necessarily want to see a Democrat get into office, but I want to see the ones who have been more extreme be held account to their actions. And as a Midwesterner who enjoys hunting and the Second Amendment, I want to see him be held to account for what he said.
Yeah, I would definitely say that. And he is 38 as well. He's younger.
Entertainment value? Harris.
Oh, Harris. Okay.
Harris has
Sweet.
never run against a Republican in any office she's ever held. Ever.
That's really interesting. I did not know that.
Trump is going to eat her alive.
Oh my gosh, 100%.
I mean, she's got that prosecutorial edge that she has, but again, it's just been she's never had to be held account for her political views because she's always run against people who have had similar or the same political views. Now that she
Mhm.
has to go and run on the other side, now she's actually got to be held account for it.
Yeah, and I think from a conservative perspective, I would take that completely into account and take advantage of it too. From like a competitive side, you want to intimidate them with that aspect.
So, in the spirit of talking about the presidency, let's talk about this town hall where some of the leaders were brought onto CNN and asked a bunch of questions from the audience. I was
hmm
quite surprised to see that they weren't getting softballed these questions either, because as we know, a lot of these outlets now right now don't want any of these people to have to actually answer for their agendas. They just want to throw the softball questions. Now, in this town hall, one of the most interesting things to take away, and one of the things that's been talked about the most this past week, was a comment from a question that was asked to several of the Democrat contenders going forward. It's an idea that's been thrown around in conservative circles and liberal circles already. I honestly am a little bit afraid of the fact that the next election is going to go to the first person who allows this to happen
Hmm.
on the post prison side of it. But the question was, should felons who have been convicted and are in prison be allowed to vote?
Yes. And when I researched this, I thought it was extremely interesting how many convicted felons were out of prison and weren't allowed to vote.
Yes, yeah, once you've been convicted of a felony, you don't get your rights back. But that's been a conversation that we've been having because once you've paid your debt to society, I think a lot of us are ready to let some of these people go and be back into society, especially the white collar ones that are felonies, because nobody really got physically hurt out of that. It's a little bit ridiculous that some of these are taken away. Now,
Yeah, exactly.
some of the more violent ones we could have a debate on. It may
Hmm.
be because of the crime, the amount of, but if you've paid your debt to society, you should be able to, like, if you were 17 in 1977 and you robbed the bodega, you did your time, you did 5 years, you got out. It's 2019, you're still not allowed to vote.
Hmm. And that is the issue that I see. I think after your prison sentence has been served, depending on the crime, you should be allowed to have that right back. Because, like you said, you are 17 at one time, you rob I'm not sure what a bodega, what is that?
It's usually a colloquial term, especially over on the East Coast, for a small convenience store.
Okay, so like a Casey's.
Yeah, we
Do you
have
have,
Casey's here actually too.
okay, perfect. So, like that, for instance, once you would have served that time, you definitely would have had time to think about that and realize that probably that wasn't the best choice. Is that crime significant enough to take away your right to vote? Is the question.
Well, while you're doing your time, yes, it is significant enough to do so. The conversation that I've been having with different guests on my show, different shows I've been on, is yes, once that's all done, once you've paid your debt to society, once your parole is over, yes, you should get your rights back. The conversation that was going through the town hall, though, was completely different.
Hmm.
The the audience member asked the candidates whether or not the people who are currently in prison should be allowed to vote as well.
Yeah, and I saw that.
And they kept bringing up the same thing. Should the Boston bombers be allowed to decide the
Yes,
fate of the country?
that's a tough question.
That's a hard no for me, I'm not going to lie.
Uh-huh. Yeah, why do you say that? Just so I have like background on your perspective too.
My perspective on while you're in prison, you've done a crime, you've had your rights taken away, and that's the same thing too with your Second Amendment rights. You don't have your Second Amendment rights either while you are in prison, or far
Yes.
afterwards, depending on the crime. You should be able to get those back. But no, you are being punished by society. You have committed a crime that has you've committed a crime under your own free will that has warranted you being taken out of society, and that means that you should not be allowed to decide the direction that society takes, at least until your time is served.
Yes, and I would agree with that.
We physically remove you from society by putting you into a prison. So, yeah, exactly.
Hmm. And that's the thing is what I also thought was very interesting is the comments that Bernie Sanders made on, and he said, like, quote, in quotations, this is a democracy and we have to got to expand that democracy. And I believe every single person does have the right to vote. And so with that, you can see that obviously he's very left on this issue, I would say.
He's trying to
But
buy extra votes, is what he's trying to do.
exactly is that's going to be something that appeals to the Democratic Party as he appears as an extremist.
Yeah, and he's. It's really hard for me to look at this and be objective to it because, yeah, I understand the fact that whoever restores these rights to votes to people are going to be the people that win the votes. And that's going to be
Hmm.
the same thing when we go on to decide whether or not we allow people who have served their time to vote. If the conservatives put it forward, put the legislation forward. A conservative president signs it. What are the people returning to society going to do? They're going to want to vote conservative because that was the group that went out and got them their rights back. That's who made them human again, essentially. Productive members of
Exactly.
society again. Or if it goes the other way, they're going to go the other way. They're going to migrate to the group that thought that they were good enough.
Yeah. And so I would agree. I would say that my opinions on this are when you are in prison and serving your sentence, you should be deprived of those rights. Afterwards, another discussion. There's a lot of factors that come into play with that one. But you have made the choice to commit a crime that was severe enough to get you a prison sentence, and that's significant.
I feel like with Sanders and everybody else who answered this question, I feel like they wouldn't say the same thing about the Second Amendment rights being restored to these people in prison. I don't know. That's just me. I don't think they would do it.
You don't think they would
I
give
don't.
them their
I don't
Second
think.
Amendment rights
No, I
back?
don't think they would give them back at all.
That is such a great question that you would ask. The irony of it shows is okay, so you are going to give them their voting rights back. So what about their Second Amendment rights? Can
Yeah.
they have those back as well? And I have a feeling they would probably take a totally different stance.
Well, that's completely different. We have to protect ourselves from these very dangerous people, but we will give them a voice in order to bring them and let them vote for the right people.
Exactly.
And get me my pudding
What?
cup. I like my tapioca.
Oh my goodness. What an issue.
Well, the other issue that came out of this town hall was the candidates were asked about the census because one of the big deals out there is that with Trump as the head of the executive branch, which takes the census, which is coming up next year, in fact, Trump wants to put a question onto the upcoming census asking whether or not the people who are on the census are a citizen. The opponents to this idea state the fact that people who are not a citizen will be reluctant to answer this question for fear that they will be either arrested or what's the word I'm looking for? Not expedite. I keep wanting to think expedited, but and then I keep thinking exported, but they're not commodities. They can't get exported either. Deported. That's the word.
Yeah.
They're going to get deported if they answer this question. Which, hi, take care. Answer the question. Well, that's just my personal opinion on the idea. But when I was on Call Me Ignorant last week, we talked about this question as well. I look at the census question and the citizenship question on the census, and I think it's
Hmm.
important. The census is supposed to be anonymous. I realize that it can't really be anonymous, otherwise, people could go out and just artificially inflate the numbers anyway. But the other side of this is the two things for the census, or three things: taxation. That's been an ongoing debate as to why Joseph and Mary had to go back to Bethlehem to go onto their census instead of Nazareth, where they were living, because it was supposed to be for taxation. I've had many debates about that one. But it's taxation, representation, and to make sure that public works are properly allotted for. Now, if you're not a citizen, you should not have representation. If you're not a citizen, you're most likely not going to be taxed.
Hmm.
But you are still going to be using the public works. You're still going to be using the road. You're still going to be using the public building. And you are going to be putting that much wear and tear onto that building. So, with the citizenship question, if you are answering yes, you are a citizen, no, you are not, we can allot properly for representation, which is the reason that I think these left candidates want to leave the question off, is so that these areas get extra representation. But we can get proper representation, but we can still get our public works allotted for the load that's going to be put on them, and we are not going to have to sit and repair them over and over again because they're being overused and we didn't accommodate for it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that is significant. It's a great point to bring up. The use of public properties is for the public, but the amount of people who are not citizens of the US who are using those public properties and not paying their dues for them compared to the amount of US citizens who are being taxed for that kind of thing, I don't think it's fair.
Yeah, and again, from an engineer standpoint, from a city engineer standpoint, yes, you want to make sure that your roads can accommodate the number of people who are driving over them.
Hmm.
Otherwise, the rest of us have to drive on crappy roads.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I think on that. Where do you land on all of that? You kind of touched a little bit, but
With having that question on the census,
yeah,
I think it's viable. I don't see the census is anonymous, correct?
it is supposed to be, but you're still going to have your name on it because that's how they know who has done it and who hasn't.
Okay. So I understand their fear of deportation, but at the same time, I know people who have come to the US as immigrants that have done the work to get their green card and become eligible technically or legal to be here.
Hmm.
Not necessarily eligible citizens, but it is legal for them to be here. And so if you are an illegal immigrant and you are in our census and participating in these kind of things and using our public facilities and opting out of those taxes, like I said, I think it's unfair. And so having that question is legitimate.
I think we are in agreement on that.
Yeah, I don't see why we shouldn't utilize that because really, truly, it's a question.
And not to make it too much of a stinky topic at the end here before I move on to the last one, but yeah, I want to make sure that my sewer system is designed and engineered to handle the amount of sewage that's going to be going through it.
Hmm.
That's
Makes
just me.
sense. Yeah, everyone needs to be accounted for.
So, since you're in college now, let's talk college.
Let's talk college.
Elizabeth Warren this past week suggested not just having the government pay off student debt. We've been having this conversation for legitimately 25 years at this point, but
Hmm.
instead just making that money disappear completely out of the system entirely and doing the same with college costs. There is so
Oh
much money
man.
that is tied up into the student loan, student debt industry right now. This would bankrupt entire sectors of banking and put a lot of people out of jobs. But the other side of that is there are a lot of people out there that think that this would help, especially people who are currently in college, such as yourself.
Mhm.
So where do you stand on this? What did you see when you saw this?
So at first, I am in college. I do not have any student loans right now. Thankfully, my family was very proactive about that. And I am so blessed in that aspect because I know a lot of kids do suffer financially when it comes to college expenses, as you raise your hand. But I also am a freshman, and I'm not sure how long the money that my parents and my grandparents have saved will last as college expenses have gone up, but it is incredibly costly. And I don't think I put this into perspective until I opted out of one of my classes. And what they call it at SDSU is you take a W. I'm not sure if that's a national thing that they do, but that class is on your transcript and you have to pay for it, but basically you dropped it. And I had to go in and pay for that class, and it was over $1,000. I did not receive any credit.
Hmm.
I just didn't drop it before the add and drop date. And so with that, it put into perspective, okay, I'm never going to do this again because it is a complete waste of money, one. And two, it is incredibly expensive to go to college. And so, from that aspect, I completely understand. There are so many kids with, especially when you take colleges, that have this debt that is incredibly significant that is causing them to not be able to afford their first house and have a down payment on that or buy a new car after they've gotten married and want to start a family. But at the same time, there is, like you said, bankruptcy and banks are a huge part of this, and it would put a huge burden on them if this were ever to be allowed or her plan would be in effect. But in addition to that, eliminating the financial inequalities of this is understandable. But what about the social inequalities? If you take into account someone going to Harvard and someone going to South Dakota State, there is a huge difference. And so, also with that, what about scholarships? How does that come into play? So, are we going to be giving athletes scholarships across the board? Or what do we make as your attractive factor for schools? Are they going to be costly? Are they going to be affordable? Like the social inequality that entails this issue is very significant.
All right, we have a lot to work with that. Well, this didn't start out as just eliminating that money from the system completely. I've talked about this before. I've called Warren out on Twitter for this before, but the first thing that she wanted to do was in this country you're taxed on your income. You taxed on the money that you make throughout the year
Yes.
through interest payments on your wealth or the money that you earn from your job or anything that comes in. You don't actually get taxed on what you own except for property, but that's
Hmm.
usually on a local level. That's not on a federal level.
Hmm.
Warren's first proposal was to put a tax in on the wealth, on the things that you own, as well
Yes.
as the interest that you make off of them, and to try and use that to pay things off. But yes, now she went even further and said, let's just eliminate this, which, I mean, a lot of people look at the student loan companies and say that they need to go away anyway. Sallie Mae is predatory. This company is that, and the other companies. A lot of people have negative feelings toward these companies, but the reality is a, they're tied to other financial institutions and other banks, which the banking sector is huge in this country, and to just eliminate that money out of there would put a lot of these banks completely out of business and completely out of viability in the country. As I said,
Yes.
that would bankrupt entire sectors of this country. Not to mention it's unconstitutional through Amendment 5 in the Takings Clause.
Hmm. And I think that is a huge role too. Like, as she proposes, yes, it relieves stress on the student side of things, but that almost puts in my head like a reminder of the Great Depression is when you mess up the banking aspects of our country, it is going to put a huge burden on our economy.
Mm-hmm. When you look at, and the proposals out there are to change the role of college, I think. I don't want to get completely tinfoily on this, but I mean, when I look at the idea, we're going to eliminate the cost of college. We're going to make the state pay for college if you're going to a state school like South Dakota State or the University of Wisconsin. If you're going to a state school, you get to go and do that for free, and you only have to pay if you're going to a private school like Harvard or Yale or something like that. First off, that's
Yes.
going to pull major attendance away from some of these more prestigious universities who have built a name for themselves. I mean, they're suffering in their own ways now, but they've, for the most part, built a name for themselves as being able to almost guarantee that somebody's going to have a decent career when they come out of there.
Hmm.
Furthermore, how does this make college any different from high school? And you remember what it was like in high school and just the differences that we've had over the years with high school and how that has changed the role in society.
Oh, yeah, I would definitely say it's a huge uh downer from that point. It would be a step, yeah, a step down because with that, I would say the kids right now that go to Harvard and choose to apply, they work their butts off. They know what they're getting into. They're smart as can be, and that is what they want for themselves. But with this, how do you know? that kids who aren't as driven and are just attracted to the Harvard name wouldn't apply for the same things. I think that would be hard for the students who go there with good intentions. And it reminds me of that high school aspect of things.
Well, yeah, I feel like having the free college, having the state pay for it, just devalues the ability of the college to do the education. You're flooded with students that you're trying to push in and out because you're getting that sweet government money from the taxpayers to do so. But
Exactly.
furthermore, I mean, look at the difference in education. From what I've seen on social media, look at the difference in education between my graduation in 2002 and yours in 18.
2018.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a significant difference in the level of education that's gone out between there. And in 2002, it was almost impossible at the time to go out and get a regular white collar job unless you
Mhm.
went to college.
Yeah.
I went to trade school, so it's a little bit different for me. But I mean, you get out of college and you're expected to, or get out of high school, you're expected to go to college and go sit in that finances desk and do data entry at the time.
Hmm.
The internet has changed a little bit of the role of that. I mean, I went to trade school for auto mechanics and now I host a radio show.
Yeah, I believe it.
So that there's a difference there. But to go back even further, I have an uncle dropped out of high school in the 10th grade in 1975.
Oh my goodness.
Dropped out. No, nothing past the 10th grade education.
Hmm.
His significance to his career and the world is the fact that he was the partner and an engineer for a company that made meatpacking equipment, specifically a company that designed machines that made hamburger patties. I'll tell you
Okay.
off mic which company it is. You might be familiar with it, but yeah, partner in a $1 million, multi-million dollar company with a 10th grade education from the 70s.
Hmm.
My age group could not do that. It wouldn't happen. We
Uh-huh.
didn't have the same level of education and the same level of knowledge by the time we were in 10th grade to be able to do something like that.
Yeah. Um, that just comes into play and into question how valuable and essential education has come to our society, I would say.
And yeah, if we make this mandatory, well, yeah, by the time, if you make college state paid, what's the next step? You make it mandatory. Okay, now it's devalued. And now, okay, now you get out of college and your degree is worthless.
That's exactly the concern that I have with it is the devaluing of the college degree
You are moving.
with I am sorry. I have to plug my computer in. But yeah, I would say also the US has become more comfortable with me. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say that. I'm having second thoughts about it, but I would say that there are more kids who are being able to go to trade schools and come out with decently paying jobs.
Hmm.
But I would also say that there are so many kids ways that the necessity for even a graduate degree has also increased.
Well, it's interesting. I talked about this a little bit on a couple of other shows. I and I hate to say that college is becoming an indoctrination center now, but some of the things that I've seen in the real world make me really believe that it actually has. I when I have time, which doesn't happen now, but before I started my show, I was also writing a novel.
Okay, awesome.
I was location scouting. One of the lead characters in the novel was he was a stock swindler essentially, but he wanted to go legitimate and join up with an accounting firm. There's an accounting firm in Madison that I wanted to have him interviewing for in one of the chapters. So I
Hmm.
actually went there, toured the building, and saw the boardroom where the scene would have taken place.
Wow.
Because I went to a mechanics school, I've got a fair ability in mathematics that I think a lot of people coming out of college don't necessarily have.
Hmm.
When I did, because I went to a 4 year college before I went to trade school, I got 100%, not just an A, but 100% in my accounting class. So, I
That's
mean, doing
awesome.
numbers comes naturally to me. So I
Hmm.
talked to the the lady that was giving me the tour, and I said, I'm kind of dissatisfied in the job that I'm doing right now. What would it take for a guy to come in off the street and get a job here or an apprenticeship and learn how to do this? And the first thing that she said was, well, you need to have a bachelor's degree. I said,
Hmm.
okay, well, I don't have that, but just out of curiosity, if I wanted to go back and do it, what would you need to have it in? Oh, it doesn't matter. You just need to have a bachelor's degree.
Yep. So that right there tells you, actually, that's so funny because my dad actually owns a real estate business here in town. And technically, you do not have to have a college degree to be a real estate agent. You just need to have your real estate license to be able to sell homes in South Dakota.
Same here,
But
actually.
yeah, and so I asked him, I was like, "Hey Dad, what if I just go get my real estate license?" And he goes, "I'm not hiring you until you got your bachelor's degree." And I was like, "You know my major is sport management, right?" And he was like, "I'm not hiring until you got your bachelor's degree."
So, last thing I want to touch on this, you don't have any student debt. I don't know if your elder siblings do. You had mentioned you had an older brother before.
Yes.
You don't know. I don't know if they have anything or not. But so
Nope,
many
he
people in
doesn't
this
either.
country have been very responsible with their student loans. They got them paid off. So many of them did actually get jobs as soon as they got out, so they were able to do this. Or many other people also have significant parts of their student loans paid off completely. It's all done.
Yes.
What do you think happens now to those people if either the government pays off everybody else's student loans or they just eliminate them from the economy altogether? How do we compensate these people that put all that money in?
I can So actually the really interesting thing here is my brother does not have any student debt because he actually went to a junior college for 2 years.
Hmm.
And so that was not as expensive as a state school or a private school. But my stepmom is a dentist. And so she still has student debt to this day. And she has a monthly payment where she makes a payment to her student debt loans. And if that were to, or this plan would be effective, I think it would really make her mad because she is um such a hard worker in that aspect.
Hmm.
She knew what she was getting herself into. She knew that if she would get her doctorate degree, that she would have to take out these loans, yes, but she was going to be able to make enough money to pay them off in a timely fashion. But she worked so hard for that, and the banks necessarily instill their trust in her with
Hmm.
this. And so I think it would devalue her work ethic in that aspect too. Because she worked for this. Like, she made the effort to take out those loans. She is now paying them back with her practice and her education. Why why take that away from her? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's been one of the arguments that's been going around the circles that have been talking about this idea is nobody's paying attention to the people that were responsible. They just want to talk to the people who are struggling with it, which I am
Hmm.
struggling with it. I could understand entirely how much easier that would be if that burden was lifted off my shoulder, but
Oh yeah.
I I made the choice to do it, so I do have to get it taken care of.
Exactly. And there are ways to be financially smart about these kind of situations. Like my brother, you can do 2 years at a junior college, and it is cheaper than 2 years at South Dakota State. If you cannot financially afford that kind of schooling, don't apply for it yet. Do what's in your best interest, what is going to be best for you situationally.
Well, on that note, it looks like we're at 93 minutes right now, so
Wow.
let's run through the outro here. And
Yeah, let's do that.
as we close out Ed's World, since so much of what we talk about has such a negative connotation and such a downer, we always try to end on a positive note. So, because you're a writer, I'm actually going to pull that out of the eligible topics onto this because it has to do
Okay.
with politics and everything. So, tell us about a hobby that you have that has nothing to do with school or writing or politics at all.
Oh man. Okay. So, one thing that is a huge part of my life is very significant, actually really cool, played a big role in my college decision. I am a cheerleader at South Dakota State University. I love what I do. I don't have an off season. And so my dad actually went to South Dakota State and he had a scholarship as a student athlete, and my grandpa went to South Dakota State and he had a scholarship as a student athlete. And so now I'm going to South Dakota State as a cheerleader and doing what I love. And I would definitely say that it played a big role in my college choice because I really wanted to get out of South Dakota. South Dakota's small. I've been here my whole life. I live still in my hometown, which is a lot different, but I love it. And this is crazy because financially it worked out perfectly. And I am so thankful to have South Dakota State in my life. And I would definitely say that academically, when it comes to writing and school, I take that very, very seriously. And South Dakota State has accommodated me perfectly in that aspect with the honors college as well. So I'm very excited about my 4 years in Brookings and excited about graduate school someplace else. But I love cheering here and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you again to the audience for checking out this show. Again, if you are watching on YouTube, make sure that you go down into the description. All of Carlee's pertinent information is going to be there. Go ahead and check her out.
And
She'll
thank
have
you, yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to make sure, like, I thanked you properly for inviting me on here and taking a look at my blog. It really, really means a lot to me because it is something that I just kind of picked up on my own. So thank you.
again, as we're going through this, look down and hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you like what you saw, and I hope that you did. If you're listening back to this on an audio platform later, once again, hit that subscribe button. We have new content every Tuesday, and you will find some bonus content on the audio platforms that you will not find on the YouTube channel. I went over, as I mentioned before, on to Call Me Ignorant with my friend Stephen Ignoramus this past week, and I have the audio upcoming onto the audio platform for that. So make sure you check that out, and if you are looking at this on iTunes, leave us that 5-star rating and a good review. That really helps us out. To further this conversation, you can follow me on Twitter. That is at EdsBlog Twitter with a 1 in place of the I. And if you want to finish the conversation with Karlee here, Karlee, tell everyone where we can find you.
Yeah, so I am a blogger of Dakota Charlie. That's me. And my website is dakotacharlie.com. I also have a Facebook page and it's just Dakota space Charlie, the two words there. And then I have an Instagram page and it's at Dak Charlie, so DAK Charlie, and it's all lowercase. But I usually write about once a month, once every 2 months. I'm always kind of looking for input in that aspect. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to see what you do in the future and as well, like what I can take from this. And I'm really glad I got this opportunity.
As we always say on this channel, never ever take the words of bloggers, podcasters, or journalists as gospel. Find all the facts and draw your own conclusions. Karlee, you have last word.
Okay, well, thank you guys for listening today. And we hope to see you back next week, right?
Yep, next week.
Sweet, next week.
I
Thanks,
will. Next week
guys.
I'll have Steffi Cole on from. I know she's a supporter for Austin Peterson for Liberty, and I know she's got some other details. We'll talk about that. Take care, everyone.